Hello everyone, it's Mark Wood here. I'm going to be doing tonight's webinar. Tonight's webinar is based around OpticsPro 10. It's really about some of the new features, but how to use the software and how it integrates into your workflow, how it integrates into my workflow. And I'm a photographer, as you might well imagine. I work in fine art photography, working on images for print and exhibition. I've also worked as a press photographer. I photograph interiors. And the thing I want to start off by saying is that I'm not afraid to sit down and spend a lot of time processing photographs if it's part of a creative process. This photograph is composed of at least 60 photographs stitched together in Photoshop with a great deal of patience. And because it's part of a creative process, I don't mind doing it. What I don't want to be doing is spending time correcting problems from a photograph. I stitch together photographs, and like I say, I'm not afraid to spend time in front of the computer. But in, say, a photograph like this, which is a press photo, I want to be able to take the shot, bring it to the computer, catalog it, have the software process the photograph nice and quickly, and so I can get it done and out. Because the part of these photographs is the taking of the photograph, recording the moment and sharing it as quickly as possible. What I don't want to be doing is spending time enhancing things. I spend time photographing interiors and lighting designs for a number of interior design companies. And finesse in raw conversion is very important too. So this is bone china fish being lit. It's an interesting shot, but it has to be processed subtly, and this is something that OpticsPro can do for me. So here's one of the interiors. Now I'm not going to be showing work, and what I'm going to be doing is, first of all, I'm going to start within Lightroom. Let me just see if I can close this panel now. There, that's good. You didn't see that, but I had a little panel open. I worked for many years within Aperture. I've made the swap over to Lightroom for the time being anyway. Most of my image library is within Lightroom. So the first photograph I want to show you is, and the first demonstration is how you can work in Lightroom and round trip your photograph from Lightroom into OpticsPro. I'm just making this point at the beginning, if you didn't know this, because you may not want to have to reinvent your workflow with a new piece of software. So here we have a photograph, and I want to show you what sold me on OpticsPro. This is a photograph I took several years ago at a gig, and hopefully you'll see this in the transmission, but there's a lot of digital noise in the background. And you may know that you can spend time with software removing digital noise. But what really sold me was how this photograph was interpreted by OpticsPro from the get-go. If you are a Lightroom user, you might be aware that you can right-click on an image and choose Edit In and choose an external editor such as Photoshop or Viewpoint with the DxO package. But what I'm going to do is actually swap my raw conversion. So rather than use Lightroom, I'm going to use DxO OpticsPro. So I'm going to go to File here and plug in Extras. And down here we see Transfer to OpticsPro, and this is going to swap the raw conversion from Lightroom, Adobe Camera Raw, into the OpticsPro raw converter. And here we go. And the first thing I'm going to do is zoom in really nice and close. And hopefully you're seeing this already, but I'm going to toggle between the two photographs. The digital noise is already gone, because one of the first things that OpticsPro applies will be noise reduction. So let me just close this down a little bit. Here we go. The noise reduction panel. I'll just come back. Fiddling around with my tablet there. There we go. Noise reduction has been applied. And it's in the high quality option, not prime at the moment. It's because it's not a hugely high ISO photograph. And if I swap back to Lightroom, you see the difference straight away, that the noise has gone. Now you might argue that this photograph is lighter and has a little bit more texture to it at the moment within Lightroom. So over in OpticsPro, I can do some further adjustments. Let me zoom out so you can see the whole image. And let me start at the top. So down here, I could look at a little bit of exposure compensation. To explain the way I'm going to work this tonight, I'm just going to quickly process this photograph, then break things down into their constituent parts, the order in which you might want to process a photograph, and how to avoid doing something, then later on undoing that with another slider. So I'm working from the top of the screen down, and in selective tones here I might just bring the background and make it darker, and over in contrast maybe bring up a little bit of micro contrast. I will explain what all these are later to add some punch and bite to this photograph. So hopefully you're seeing this. It's good and strong and punchy, lots of detail here. And over in Lightroom we have noise. I could do some processing here. Over in OpticsPro the image is done. And when I've finished, if you're going to do this round tripping, you need to export this back to Lightroom if you're going to have it back in your Lightroom catalog. So I'll click on this button here, Export to Lightroom. And you have a number of format options. We have JPEG, TIFF and DNG. Now you may know that DNG, the digital negative format, is a wrapper, a container in which a raw file sits. So I can take this raw information with no loss of information and stick it inside the DNG wrapper and send it back to Lightroom. The potential problem when doing that is that Lightroom is a raw converter as well and may reinterpret the good work that I've done in OpticsPro and change the tonal qualities of the image. So I would favor choosing TIFF or JPEG as the export option. Now I'll leave the quality set to 90, but it could come down to 80. And the ICC profile, I could choose a profile to set this to, but if I'm going to inkjet print or send it out to a magazine, I would choose Adobe RGB. And if I was sending it to a photo lab, eventually I would choose sRGB. So I could choose that option and then click export. And the image is then sent back into Lightroom. Okay, we're going to come back to Lightroom a little bit later on to see how I would work in a workflow. So here we have the before and after images, just back into Lightroom. For now, we're going to leave that and we're going to do a lot more work within OpticsPro, because what I've not done really as of yet is introduce the interface. So I was using Lightroom a bit like the Organize panel inside OpticsPro. Let me close down these projects. So what you're seeing here is my computer and my hard drive with some folders, and I've pre-prepared some images for this webinar. Here we have them. Let me just zoom out. So I could use this Organize panel to sift, sort, catalog my photographs. I prefer to use Lightroom for this, but here we have them inside OpticsPro. And I'm just going to show you a new feature within OpticsPro 10. So ClearView. I've got a few photographs that I took earlier this year. I'm trying to work out which one. I think it's going to be this one. And I'm going to show you what I can do with it. So I'm going to click the Customize button here in the toolbar. And over on the left-hand side of the screen, I have my navigator, my zoom in, pan round option. But to save a bit of space and make things nice and big, I'm going to close this down now and just concentrate on the panel on the right-hand side. And I'm going to swap my workspaces. So at the moment I've got the standard DxO workspace, but within the Elite edition of OpticsPro I can do some nice customization of my workspace. So I'm just going to start off with the essential tools. And the reason for doing this is to underline the essential workflow, the basics that you do to a photograph. And as you look down the right hand side, things have been simplified. I've got less palettes in view, and you can see that there are a number of options switched on, because as this is OpticsPro, a number of things have been done automatically based on the DxO module for this particular camera and lens combination. DxO, as you may know, spend a lot of time testing very rigorously lens and camera combinations so they can get a profile for your equipment. So this software already understands this particular camera, and if I click compare, even though I've only just opened it, you may see the image shift slightly as the lens correction comes into play. I would normally work at checking white balance if I wanted to modify that, and exposure compensation, then smart lighting. But just to demonstrate this, I'm going to show you the power of this thing called ClearView. So I'm going to click this little button here. And this is an anti-haze option, a filter, that does a really excellent job of bringing in detail that is lost because of atmospheric perspective, the thing that happens that makes mountains in the distance bluer. And it's a great feature that's arrived in OpticsPro 10, and throughout the webinar you'll see me make use of it. You'll also see the tools that I used before using smart lighting, before using ClearView, and those tools that I use afterwards. So let me move on a little bit. So that's just a quick enhancement of that photograph, which is one of the things that makes demonstrating DxO software so challenging, is that a lot of really good stuff is done automatically. I don't have to do much. The corrections are there, but I do have some photographs where I want to do more. I've had a really busy year, and I've only managed to have 3 days holiday. And on those 3-day holiday with my family, I went to Whitby in North Yorkshire. It's the place where Bram Stoker wrote Dracula. And this is the churchyard that features in the novel of Dracula. So I'm going to later on add some creative effects to this, but for now I want to see what kind of enhancements can be made. So already OpticsPro has made some adjustments. It has adjusted white balance for me. It has set a value. Some smart lighting is already in place. I'm just going to click this disclosure triangle here, and you see that there's a slight amount of smart lighting in place. ClearView doesn't come on by automatically, and noise reduction is in place, the standard high quality, which is excellent. There won't be too much noise in this photograph. So with those corrections in place, let me see what I can do to enhance the photograph. I'm going to go to the palettes here and bring up the histogram. You see the histogram palette here. I need to set the white balance appropriately for this photograph. And a little tip for you is that I can see the red, green and blue parts of the histogram out of alignment. And as a general rule, the red, green and blue channels should map, especially in an area like this. So I know that if I move the temperature slider to the right and keep going, the photograph corrects itself. Okay, yeah, I could use the eyedropper and click on a neutral grey. If I had a grey card in this photograph, I could be clicking on that. But I've just, because I shoot RAW, I have my camera set on daylight settings pretty much all the time. And by the time I took this photograph, it was getting into the evening. So there's a correction of white balance, viewing the histogram to give me a sense of the kind of lighting that would be there. And I'm still being corrective in my editing. Next, I'm going to open up exposure compensation and also work with DxO Smart Lighting. So I've opened this panel up but done nothing yet, and I'm going to bring up the intensity of the smart lighting, and the image previews itself. And over here I'm going to swap the exposure compensation from manual to smart. The reason for doing that is that I've got smart lighting and a smart exposure compensation. As I move one slider, it isn't working against the other. Sometimes when you're working in software, you move up one slider at the top and you move further down and make a correction there. And what you've just done positively, you've sort of done a negative reaction further on. So that's why you would choose the smart options here and change the intensity of smart lighting. And then I could move on to selective tone, working in highlights, midtones and shadows. But what I'm going to do, because I've got it in the Elite copy version, is to click on Smart Lighting. I'm just going to switch that off again. Just look at that straight away. The sky's coming in, the grassy area is getting more punch, so the atmospheric perspective has been improved. I could then go back a little step if I wanted to and adjust these sliders to bring up or bring back areas of the image, forcing in a little bit of black. So as I move the sliders to the left, I'm increasing the blackness, the darkness of these sliders, over to the right, the whiteness. So that's a correction of that particular photograph. And later on, I'm going to return to it and get creative with it. Because like I say, this is where Bram Stoker wrote Dracula. So I want to get some sort of eerie graveyard stuff going on with that photograph. So rather than use photographs from real jobs, press shots or interior shots, I'm kind of trying to demonstrate the sort of things that happen when you're on tour, whether that's on a family holiday or a photographic tour, or it may be the same thing. And here we have a nighttime scene. It's okay, the exposure is actually accurate, it was getting dark. But I want to show you how powerful this software is and how I can recover the shadow detail. So I'm going to go up to the top here and click into a one-to-one view. Just let us come in, and I'm going to open up Smart Lighting. So if I switch it off, just for a moment, already the software's done something. The automatic setting has already applied some smart lighting, so I'm recovering information in the shadows already. And I can click up the intensity of the smart lighting to reveal more information. And again, I can do a smart exposure compensation, so that exposure compensation against the smart lighting balances out against itself, and it's looking good. But a reminder, you may see now a little bit of a problem area here where there seems to be no information, but compared to where we started from, it was black, and the software's recovered information. And just to underline that the software's working all the time, noise reduction was applied automatically. If I was to switch this off, just take a moment, you can see lots of chroma noise in these shadow areas, the red and green pixels that have been generated because there was just it was so dark an image. So the noise reduction goes in automatically, and I'm just going to zoom out. And from knowing that the image is correcting nicely, I could come in again to the selective tone sliders, make a few adjustments, and there you go. I mean, it's just a little example shot that I took to illustrate the power of recovery that the software has over the darkest images in a photograph, the darkest parts. Here's another different kind of problem. This time, where are we? We're going to come this way. These are my kids, and well, one reason for taking it is that it is my kids. We're on a boat going out to sea, and I'm shooting directly into the sun. It's not something that you're supposed to do as a photographer, but I had no choice. I could try and use a fill flash here, but it would have to be mightily powerful. And this is another situation where there's a very strong backlight, where smart lighting can help. I've switched it off in this image earlier, just so you can see it without smart lighting on. By default, it would be on, so this is what it would look like. But let me take you through how to work beyond the basics here. I'm going to bring up the intensity of the smart lighting, and then look at the adjustments here for mid-tone darkness, and perhaps bring back the blacks. So I'm achieving some good tone here, but I'm going to click compare. So it's a real radical push in the photograph. You can see the image as well bending back into shape as the lens correction comes into play. But this is Catherine, and what we're seeing here is some magenta redness in the skin because I've pushed the image so much. I need to make some corrections. So how would I do that? Well, if I move further down here, I better swap my workspace to all the palettes. In all the palettes, I have some color options, color here, this color panel. If you like, I can just tear this off so you can see what I'm working with. And I'm going to open up hue, saturation, and lightness. This is a tool that you find in lots of imaging software. And what I'm going to do is simply target the reds, the magentas, maybe the yellows, to do some skin correction in this particular photograph. So I'm going to come in here, switch this on first, and I'm going to start off with the reds. I'm going to bring back the saturation of the red color. So hue is the color of the color, saturation, how saturated the color is, and then bring up the luminance. Switch that off, switch it back on. I'm starting to lose the flag, so I don't want to go too far with the reds because the most offending color, I think, is the magentas. So with this, I can bring back the saturation of the magentas and the lightness and compare. And having made that correction, I might then go back up to the tone controls, much further up, selective tone, and maybe just punch in a bit more black. And in contrast, something I'll deal with in a moment, a bit of micro contrast to put some punch back into those details. So there we go. So just a little bit of a recap. The software does a great job automatically. By introducing smart lighting and increasing the smart lighting, you start to create some issues you might want to have to deal with, like the color saturation, which I've just done. And we're kind of good to go. So I'm going to just reset my workspaces in a moment. So bring this back into here and move on to another photograph. So it's not all about my family holiday, but I want to show you another thing that we can do from inside OpticsPro. Down at the bottom of these palettes, because I have this software installed, I have Viewpoint and Film Pack in place. And again, on tour, whether it's a proper job of photographing architectural features or just trying to photograph that cathedral that's on your holiday, you can't always get into the most ideal position. And this is the case with this part of the pier. I want to do some correction to this photograph because although it's okay and it's only a holiday snap, the verticals don't align very well. So I can use the viewpoint controls from within OpticsPro to correct this. And I'm just going to keep things simple. I'm going to go to the top here and choose the force parallel buttons. You see that viewpoint has come alive here on the right hand side. And I'm going to line up these lines to the pier. Now this part of the pier is already sloping, so I'm going to kind of guess at what would be vertical. And over here, line this up as well. And then I'm going to click preview to see what happens. So that's quite a good correction. And you're seeing on screen here a masked out area of the image that's beginning to be cropped out. I don't want that to happen. I want all of my image as much as possible. I know that I'm going to lose this area here because of the correction that I'm making. So I'm going to go to crop. And I can change the nature of the correction using the crop tool here. If I just come back, I can drag this point up, swapping the aspect ratio from original to unconstrained or one of the presets. I can drag these points in so that I'm losing nothing of the image. This little black area here is the boat I'm on. So I've got all of that correction in place. And with that done, I could click close on that. But opening up the viewpoint controls, I can use the up and down here to sort of tilt the image a little. Again, popping back into crop. Crop this in. Something else is happening as well. As I'm making this correction, the image is becoming taller than it is wide. I'm actually distorting it in the vertical axis. So this is where the X and Y ratio control comes into play. So I can move this over and just gently nudge the image out. And if the slider is being too coarse, just too quick, I can use the little buttons here to nudge the correction and set my crop. It's looking good. Then click close the crop, and if I compare, so I'm making perspective corrections from inside OpticsPro. Let's move on to something completely different. Different kind of scenario. You don't always have the choice of weather, especially in the UK, on events. So I took a day out to go to an air show. It could be a day at the horse racing, car racing, motorbikes, almost anything, any kind of event. You can't necessarily position yourself in the right place. And at the moment, the aircraft are beautifully lit on a sunny day. But partway through the show, it starts to cloud over. And also, because these aircraft are kicking out lots of smoke, I'm getting some distortion. I'm actually losing the clarity in the image, and this is an ideal opportunity to use ClearView again. So up here on the right hand side, I'm going to click on ClearView and switch it on. And here's a little thing about the workflow. As you push in things like this, these are actually something flying in the air, I think. This is a bird. I'm likely to reveal that I've got dirt on my sensor somewhere around here. So as you bring in things like micro contrast and ClearView, you will see marks on your sensor become more apparent. So just something to be aware of. I'm going to bring back the intensity of this slider a little bit because it is a bit too punchy. It's great, but it's forcing in a lot of grittiness into this area of low contrast. So if I switch off ClearView and switch it back on, the image is punching in straight away. And here's a kind of neat little trick. I want the aircraft to be sharp, but I want to knock the background out of focus a little bit. And it might be a bit of a stretch of the imagination, but you could do this with a portrait. So you could use this technique on a portrait, not just aeroplanes. So let me perhaps just bring up the control here a little. Just a little bit more micro contrast. And I'm going to go down here, this time to Film Pack, because I have it in place, and open up Creative, so Blur, get it right, it's Blur, and where are we? Switch on the blur. Come on, there we go. And with the blur in place, I'm going to set the center of the blur. So clicking on this, there's a little target. I'm going to move it over the aircraft. This could be a car, or it could be someone's face. And then I'm going to bring up the intensity of the blur, far greater than the setting that I would actually eventually want to use. But I'm doing this so that I can see clearly the radius of the blur, this option here. So if I bring the radius down, you see that more and more of the photograph becomes blurred, as you might expect. So I'm going to bring this out, so that the aircraft is in good sharp focus and the background is way out of focus. And having set that clearly, because I'm getting good visual feedback, I will just bring back the intensity slider to suit my taste for the amount of blur. And I'll click close on the vignetting, so I'll lose the button on screen. Can come in a little bit closer, just flicking around. So there we have the aircraft, nice and sharp. But what I'm not doing is forcing in too much noise into the sky around it. So I'm going to zoom out again and click compare. So not too many steps to remember, and throughout each of these images, which are quite different from each other, I'm using similar kind of process. So I was jumping into Film Pack there from inside OpticsPro. Let's go back to the grave and let's get creative again. And I'm going to click on the grave image, taken in Whitby. And I've done some corrective editing. I'm now ready to try to get a little bit creative. Because I don't, well, you may or may not agree, but I don't want to be jumping from one piece of software to another in my workflow. I want to keep things in one place so that as I create this image, it's in one place, I know where it is, I can create duplicates, but it's all been stored within OpticsPro as part of the catalog. So I'm going to come down here to Film Pack, and I'm going to take a look at style and toning, and I could be choosing black and white. Later on I'm going to add a little bit of sepia, but for now I'm going to come under the color renderings, and under these options I could look at different kinds of camera body rendering options. I'm going to go straight down to black and white film for this option. So I've got Film Pack installed, I'm going to black and white film, and a number of film effects become available to me for black and white film. And what I'm seeing on screen throughout this is instant feedback. So let me have a go at this Fuji Neopan. It renders up, I see an instant result. Now I'm not going to keep experimenting endlessly here. What I'm going to do is go down to the high-speed infrared film from Kodak, this particular effect, as a starting point. And I can increase the intensity of that effect here. I can then bring in some style of toning. So I'm going to just come in here and choose sepia. It'll come in rather strong and abrupt, so I'm going to bring back the power of that so it's a lot more subtle. And then under filter, choose red. And again, it's real, just bring back the density of the red filter. And then back up to the top. Having made those changes, I think what I want to be doing here is bringing back some of the midtones and some of the highlights in the image. And I'm instantly getting creative. And here's a little reminder of where we started from. I'll click compare. An image taken in the late evening with the wrong white balance and some exposure correction needed. OpticsPro did some of that automatically. I overrode those settings and created an alternate, and now I've become creative. And maybe just to finish this off, I would come into the crop options here. Maybe I want to keep the original aspect ratio. So I'll click on the crop tool and click and drag in a crop. Sometimes it helps with me when I'm visualizing is to drop the mask opacity. Increase the mask opacity so I see more of the crop image and less of the background. So just moving this in. So I can see what I'm creating. I will click to close that. And then I think a little bit of vignetting. Sorry, not the vignetting, creative one. I need to come down to OpticsPro. With having all these panels open, you can lose your way. So I'm just going to come down to creative vignetting and bring back the corners in the image, changing the midpoint, the of the effect, so it's more diffuse. And there we have a bit of creative editing from inside OpticsPro. Now let's imagine that I'm going to do a whole series of photographs that require this kind of processing. So as I was wandering around this graveyard and I went over to the abbey in the background, I wanted all of this kind of processing to be applied. I managed to take all the photographs in the same light, although the light is fading, it's getting into the evening. Rather than go through all those parameters on the right hand side time and time again, I just want to save this as a preset. So what I can do is go to image here, and I'm going to create a new preset from the current settings. Up it comes. I can call it Whitby and click create. And now I have within the presets the Whitby option to apply to any photograph. I sometimes sometimes do studio portrait shoots, so this kind of thing is ideal. You might have a 4-light setup, and you make your corrections, you make your creative adjustments, and then saved as a preset, so it becomes your signature portrait style for the studio. Let's just move on a little bit. Time is moving on. Hopefully you're getting something out of this. I'm going to find another image. I'm not sort of plain obsessed, but I'm going to come back to aircraft and show you how to deal with atmospheric perspective within OpticsPro in another scenario. It's not great light, but there's some interesting things going on if you are a plane spotter, that is. So I'm going to come back up here. I'm going to open up the disclosure triangle for white balance, and I could start to move these sliders around or use the eyedropper, but again I'm going to just use the slider here to make a little bit of an adjustment to make a correction on this bluish sort of day. I'm going to come down and open up the exposure compensation and set that to smart, so that as I bring up some smart lighting and the intensity, I'm clicking compare throughout this, but I could also go into a side-by-side view of the before and after. And I'm just going to knock on ClearView. Instant drama, instantly powerful. I can play around with the intensity here. I'm just going to come back to a single view because you're seeing this in effect. And then maybe over in the contrast area, just bring in a little bit of micro contrast to bring in some detail. Bear in mind that this is a shot taken fairly wide angle, and I'm zooming in quite a long way. And one of the challenges you have in photographing objects like this, that sort of airplanes with propellers, is that you have to use a very low shutter speed, because if you go anything above, say, 250th to 320th of a second, you start to freeze the propeller. This is an absolute disaster when it comes to helicopters. Again, as a press photographer, I was the only one that knew this on the local team. So when the emergency helicopters came in, the rotors were spinning in the air, whereas colleagues that set their shutter speeds to 1,000th of a second, the rotor blades weren't spinning. So there we go. A little bit of an adjustment there, and it could come into look at maybe just bring in a little bit of vibrancy to push in some color into the roundels on the aircraft. Drawing back the midtones. And it's kind of done. Let me just send this back to Lightroom. I haven't even used this. This image is actually sitting on my hard drive. It's not part of Lightroom yet. So I've maybe in this particular workflow, I've just imported the contents of my SD card, whatever, onto my hard drive. I've pointed OpticsPro at it, and having processed them here, rather than directly into Lightroom, I want to send the thing back to Lightroom, I can do that quite easily. So I'm going to click Export to Lightroom. Whichever Lightroom catalog I have open currently, the last catalog I used, it will be pushed into that catalog. I can choose the option for export, so I could choose DNG, again with the caveat that Lightroom might reinterpret the information, so I'm going to choose TIFF normally, but tonight I'll just leave it on JPEG, and it pushes the image back into Lightroom. We're back in comes the image. Let's go fit in view. So this photograph has become part of my Lightroom catalog, and what you're seeing here, because I'm looking at all photographs, is the order in which they were taken. So it's slotted it in to the catalog nicely on the date stamp information. So one sort of final thing then. So let me come through these images. I'm just trying to think what I've done here, because it's been a little bit of a while. So there we go. I'm going to take this image here and show you the difference between the starting point within Lightroom and the starting point within OpticsPro. So from here, I know I'm inside the library in Lightroom. I could go into Develop and play around with the image, but this is what Adobe Camera Raw has made of this image so far. It was a great vista. I couldn't quite get high enough in the tree line to lose the trees in the foreground, but I thought it was really powerful landscape I was looking at. And initially I had to spend a lot of time processing it. So here it is with inside Lightroom. I'm going to go to File and choose Plugin Extras and transfer the raw conversion to OpticsPro. And in it comes. And immediately OpticsPro is making an interpretation of the raw information, and this is why exporting stuff from OpticsPro to Lightroom as a DNG file can cause an issue, because there's scope for reinterpretation. So Lightroom, OpticsPro. The alignment here is okay for the white balance. Could perhaps just warm it up a touch. I don't really want to play around with smart lighting. I just want to see what ClearView does. It's instant. All that atmospheric perspective is suddenly gone. It's understood the image and applied a correction automatically. And from there, for my money, I would just go into crop, and I could perhaps choose to crop it here, or if I'm working a lot from Lightroom as my cataloging, what I might want to do is export this back. And this time I will send it back as a TIFF just to illustrate my workflow. I might even want to push it up to 16 bits. So 16 bits per channel, you're not throwing away any tonal information should you want to be pushing around the photograph a little later, or maybe opening it up into Photoshop. I'm keeping all the good stuff there. And if that's the case, I would perhaps want to swap the color space to Adobe RGB. I've done all the good raw conversion, so the reason for having Pro Photo as a working space is somewhat lost. And if some of these terms you don't quite understand them, I'll be hanging around at the end of the webinar to answer such kind of questions. So Adobe RGB 1998 will work really well. So I'm going to click Export. And I've done this before, so I'm going to overwrite it. And off goes the TIFF. And back over in Lightroom. Where are we? The image comes back in. And the reason why I didn't crop this in OpticsPro is that I've got a TIFF file here that I can crop within Lightroom non-destructively. If I'd have cropped the image in OpticsPro and exported it as a TIFF, I would have thrown away some of the information there. So from here, I might just want to pop into the Develop module inside Lightroom. Anytime you're ready. There we go. And from there, it might be that I want to do my crop here because it's non-destructive. And again, this in this workflow, it might be that I need to do some editing inside Photoshop. It might be that I'm adding text or graphics to the photograph or doing some extensive removal. So just an illustration of different kinds of workflow. Now hopefully I've not rushed through that. I've gone through a number of different options. I've tried to show you some of the new features within OpticsPro. The challenge in doing that is that a lot of it's happening under the hood. It's improvements in the speed of noise reduction, the qualities of the modules. It's all behind the scenes, and the overtly new stuff in the elite version of OpticsPro would be ClearView, and hopefully by just switching that on and off on a few different types of photographs, you've seen the power of that. So I think I'm going to open it up to questions now. So let me come back over to here. So thanks for your attending the webinar.